Welcome to Discograffiti and to a very, very special episode. This is the 1-year anniversary of Discograffiti. I remember reading a statistic which I've been frantically attempting to hunt down. It was something like 1 to 5% of all podcasts that are started. By the time they get to 6 months in, they shut down. And the Spotify sphere is littered with the graveyards of podcasts that never made it. But allow me, please, to introduce a man who, without his presence, this would never have happened. In fact, I'm not going to introduce him. He's capable of introducing himself.
Hey, everybody. All y'all out there listening to this. It's me. I'm back.
It's my good friend, Joe Kennedy.
It's nice to be here.
It's nice to have you back, Joe. Let's give a sort of like brief timeline because it's good to make a long story short and to be cognizant of that, not at the end of a story, but at the beginning.
Yeah, so I don't know, when we first started kicking this around, I feel like you were maybe telling me about a trawl you were doing. And I think it may have been like Gordon Lightfoot or something.
So just to back up a tiny bit, I actually have kept a written list of trawls that I was doing in multiple discographies at the same time.
Just before the show ever was not even a twinkle in our eye at that point.
Right. And Joe was actually on my knob about if I can use a term that the kids are bandying about kickstarting one of these because it was a super easy way to make a killing, which we found out was true.
Yeah, turns out it's a golden goose.
Yeah, it's a golden goose.
You just pretty much set up a microphone and then you just sit back. The gold coins just start raining from the ceiling.
Yeah, the only thing you have to do is to tear a hole in your ceiling because the money falls from the sky.
If by money you mean bird shit.
Bird shit, exactly. Because if wampum is acceptable in some cultures, bird shit must be as well. So what happened was for a bunch of months, we accrued notes on trawls, and then we let her rip, and we mounted a trailer. November 1st, 2021 was the introduction, was episode 1, was Pink Floyd, 1967 to 1970. We recorded in Joe's studio downtown using, incredible equipment, Neve preamp, am I right?
We would run through the Neve.
Yeah.
Why not?
Crazy setups and all kinds of crazy shit. From the get-go, we had great guests, and we wanted to accrue great episodes before we promoted it whatsoever, really. So,
yeah, that's what I was kind of about to say. There was kind of a pretty long period of like pre-production, figuring out what the show was going to be, how we were going to, all the nuts and bolts of it. Which still, if you listen to the first episode now, the show's changed quite a bit, but it's also, it's basically the same show.
You and I, the first thing we ever recorded was an episode on Beck, and there were like a million edits, and then we realized it was not right.
Yeah, and so that one, weirdly, it's sort of like I was in the Dave role in that show. Like I was kind of like driving the narrative, telling the whole, and it was like the problem with that episode was it was like 80% of me talking. That was one of the main problems. But I think we just felt like we could do it better once we heard one, and we were like, this isn't exactly really right on the money, So and there were a lot more kind of diversions and kind of like journeys down pointless alleys.
Well, Badfinger was another one that we scrapped, and the reason for that was because I felt like I was reading from my notes too much. So,
right.
We're just trying to figure out, a way to balance the research with an off the cuff, we're just here, just talking, a couple of guys talking kind of a feel. That takes a little bit of practice to get that down. But then, the funny thing is, you and I, the way that we had planned it, there were never going to be guests. And so to give credit where credit's due, Daniel Gill really was the one who came to the table with the idea of having guests. I think if we didn't take that idea, we would, never have achieved any kind of liftoff. Because we
probably would have stumbled upon that concept eventually.
Yeah. And now, of course, it's the obvious route, but the cool thing was, from the beginning, we were talking about that paperclip story and trading up, and, getting like a Z list person and then getting up to A. But we started with, Spiral Stairs and Kevin Whelan from the Wrens. I mean, we were pigs in shit from the beginning and frankly spoiled.
Yeah. And again, credit to Daniel where that's due. I think some of those people were, we were nothing at that time. The show was like,
and dumbasses
in the double digits of listens per episode.
Yeah.
And
we were psyched. Like, oh my God, 20 people just listened to that.
Yeah. So, Daniel really, I think has put his credibility on the line for us and helped us get those guests. And I think those guests begat other guests, once those guests came on and had a positive experience, it got to be a lot easier to book guests.
If you build it, he will come. It was around actually the Monkees and the Replacements when we started to get serious. I mean, look, we didn't have anything but Facebook accounts up until the beginning of spring of 2022. Then we started to promote. It started to get an audience, not a huge audience, but with Anthony Fantano, it really broke open and more people were listening, and it made it divisive between Joe and I. Is that fair to say?
Yes, there's a couple other moving parts to this. What the main one is, this has been a really tough year for me. My dad passed last year, and my mom's health is not really A+. So a lot of that's kind of really weighing on me all the time. I'm kind of just getting through this first year of grief and we all go through that, but it's kind of turning me into a little bit of a different person. You kind of have to at least the way it was with me and my dad, our relationship, I was very close to him. So that's kind of all going on in the background. And then the other thing that I hadn't really thought about until just sort of recently is that when we started this show, I was working a lot less. Like we were coming out of the pandemic period, and I would have, I had done a TV show for ABC the previous season, which got canceled. But I was in between doing that show and picking up a lot of the work that I'm doing now. And then by the time February, March rolled around, I was just up to eyeballs in work, doing music stuff. And that was a radical change because it became I had no time to really put anything more into the show other than just scraping across the finish line to get it finished. I would edit the show.
Right. You would record and edit.
Right. Record and edit. Right. So all the technical stuff I was handling, and you were handling the other side of it, which was frankly a lot more time consuming, probably doing all the promotion and making all the graphics for the ads and booking the guests and, chasing down all sorts of other stuff. But on my end, I just did not have the bandwidth to really, it was starting to become a problem, just time bandwidth.
And then conversely, what was happening with me was I feel like, aside from making films, I had found my calling. And
right.
So, I had a successful career in as a hearing instrument specialist, and I was at work putting less and less time into doing that every single day until I was putting no time into it. And in the meantime, look, we all lead our lives, and I don't blame you for any of this, but I knew you were pulling away. Consistently call you every day at 8:30 a.m. with whatever name. I could tell that you were having a tough time. And then I started piling more and more responsibility onto the show so that it would have the most amount of opportunity to succeed. Right around in June during the Jonathan Rado, Todd Rundgren series, which ironically was probably the one you were most looking forward to. In between episodes 1 and 2, you just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, I was going to need to figure out a way to do the show less somehow, and it was not heading in that direction. It was heading in the opposite direction.
Heading in the opposite direction, and fairly, if we did it less, it would be a hobby thing. And what my methodology in thinking about this is, why if it's so time consuming, I can't call it a hobby.
Right.
It would have to justify its existence as a business.
Yeah.
Because, with our kids, it's like, I can't look back at a hobby that overtook, spending time with your beautiful son, my beautiful son, or our families, and that's a tough decision. There's no easy decision there.
Yeah. And then there's the thing of if I'm going to, even doing it as a hobby, even if we had done let's say 20% less work or something, it's still a lot. It's still a lot. Look,
so
I scaled it back. that still probably wouldn't have made that much of a difference. It still wasn't really going to be probably doable for me.
Look, I wake up at 2:30 in the morning almost every day in order to get everything done. And since you and I have parted ways on the show, we've gone from 1 episode a week to 3 episodes a week.
Right.
So I'm out of my mind, but I'm on a kamikaze run to make it work. And it wouldn't be in existence if it wasn't for you. And I am cognizant of that. So
yeah, I actually feel, that is the part of it that I feel kind of best about is I was able, I feel completely satisfied helping you get this off the ground and making it become a thing and letting you run with it. Just because of that, I really can't put it at the center of my life like you can.
I'm glad that you're on because you broke the hymen, if you'll accept the horrifying analogy.
And all you out there, we're talking about all you fans who have been there since day one, who may miss me on the show. We're talking about figuring out ways to get me in there to make some guest spots myself and to make an occasional appearance, drop in and say hello. Because I really did love doing the show. That's the thing. We've said this many times. That was the best part of it. Like actually making it, like going in and cutting the episode. That was what I was in it for, really. The sheer creativity of it.
And also, you know why? It's a testament to our friendship. This is a friendship going on over 30 years. And, the creative projects that you and I have engaged in, whether this or the triple album rock opera called Elf-Harmony that we are 95% of the way through.
We're more like 66% of the way through.
It's just a justification. It's true. We're 66%. It's a justification to hang out because, after your 20s, you need to have a reason to actually get together or at least.
Yeah, right. I listen to the show now, the episodes that are just you and guests, and a lot of times I find myself wanting to jump in and I know what I would have said here, and I would have said, so I do miss doing it.
Like a homeless guy yelling at a transistor radio?
Yeah. Sometimes I talk back to the show and I'm like, why aren't they responding to me?
And so, 1 year in, here we are. I was frantically trying to find the statistic of how many podcasts make it to even 6 months.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't recover the statistic, but I remember reading it, and it was very small. And here we are, a year in. It would not be on its feet were it not for Joseph Kennedy.
I feel like getting it on its feet was maybe the easy part. Keeping it on its feet, which you're doing now, that's what's really hard. So yeah. Thank you for the credit, but really, this is your show. You put in so much love and time and effort into making this show great. I expect to see this show being really successful and being a part of your life for many, many years and being your thing. So
thanks, man. You're a welcome guest anytime.
Right on. All right, lads and ladies out there in this Discograffiti city, is that still a thing?
It kind of is a thing, yeah. So what we got in store for you now is episode number 1, Pink Floyd, 1967 to 1970. November 1st, 2021's episode number 1, Discograffiti's Pink Floyd Part 1. Enjoy. We'll see you on the other side. I'm Dave Gebroe.
And I'm Joe Kennedy.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the music podcast that delivers the objective truth about the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever existed. This, my friends, is episode 1 of a soon-to-be legendary podcast, and you will soon be loyal listeners, so let's give you an origin story, because everybody likes a good origin story.
We're making history.
That's right.
You're part of this.
That's
You're
right.
Part of podcasts, music guys talking history.
That's right. Consider yourselves very, very lucky. Joe and I are extremely compulsive music listeners. Always had, when I was a kid, I always had a listening pile, and then like the main reservoir where tapes or albums would go.
We know each other a really long time. We know each other 30 plus years now?
Yeah, 30 plus years. Yeah. So as things have developed in my listening tastes, I've developed what we both refer to as trawls. Mm-hmm. I would take an artist and actually in my free time, this is how I spent my free time, read up on an artist's chronological history as I was listening to it intently. Like I would not even move on to the next record until I was extremely familiar with it. And Joe and I would talk constantly about what are you listening to? Basically it became the podcast. So all we did was just shift everything over to the studio from the phone.
Yeah, I mean, these are kind of conversations we're having anyway. Until now, I would not do these trawls. I have a more pick and choose kind of piecemeal approach to listening to stuff. But since we've started doing this now,
it is completely upended way that you listen to music.
I've been roped in.
That's
to
right.
The format.
How does it feel?
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah, it's part of the exercise is like listening to things that I would normally just get a few tracks in and be like, oh man, I can't deal, and just and move on to something else. So the
coolest part of this whole thing is that when you get a sense of an artist or a band's overall arc, it's a way different feeling than if you're just listening to a record. You get a true sense of an artist's career.
Yeah, and it forces you to kind of stick with things that you might. I think that's kind of what I was getting at just a minute ago. I think it's a lot of things I would maybe pull. I would pull the eject button.
Right.
Get out. Sticking around. I think I've discovered some cool stuff that I may have passed up. So,
but there's certain sections of certain bands that are just harrowing to get through.
Well,
but
those are the
price
ones where
pay.
Some of the trawls you've done in the past. I'm like, wow, you're really in the rabbit hole of I don't know, whoever it was.
But now
what's like the most obscure trawl? Like, what's the most unexpected trawl?
Unexpected?
You usually pick good ones. That's the thing.
There was one that
you won't invest your time in something that's like
one that truly blew me away was Marshall Crenshaw. I could not believe how good he was.
Yeah, well, that's an example of a good one.
That was a good one, but there were bad.
Sometimes you would report back to me on you being in some late phase.
Yeah, I mean the very last Genesis album with that weird other guy singing.
Yeah, stick in there all the way through.
I stuck there all the way through. Even I didn't even give up on I Can't Dance.
Well, that's what we're doing now.
That's what we're doing now with you guys, and that's basically the concept of Discograffiti.
Today we'll be turning the metaphorical spray cans on the legendary Pink Floyd.
Yummy.
Ballroom provocateurs, whimsical psychedelic freaks turned
beer swilling architecture students,
moralizing bores.
Yes, exactly. And thus you've no need to actually listen to the full episode.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. The way Discograffiti works is we go through an entire artist or band's discography, everything, albums, EPs, singles, notable appearances, comps, everything. We listen to it in order, we research it down to the bone, and then we give everything a finely honed rating between 0 and 5.
And then we dish out our sweet, sweet opinions on all this music to you, our listeners.
We dole it out like nectar in your ear hole.
And at the end of the day, you'll have a fantastic killer playlist.
Just go to discograffiti.com and lick it up. Oh, it's only right now.
That was my part, the only right now part.
Sorry, dude. There is a lot of meat on the bone for this one. I mean, interestingly, when you think about, personal connections to Pink Floyd, or certainly when I do, there's all these different markers in your life where the band means certain things at certain times. They're, they are, operatically intense emotionally. So as a 11 or 12-year-old, The Wall's like the only thing that makes sense. At least it did to me. Then, when you're first discovering drugs, there they are peeking around the corner.
Yeah. I think the first awareness I had of Pink Floyd was maybe when I was 6, or The Wall came out, 78 or so? So I would have been 6, 7 maybe, 79. And hearing Another Brick in the Wall on the radio, it was kind of ubiquitous on the radio in those days. And even as a small child with no real context for it, it was disturbing. It was kind of a disturbing, haunting memory of mine as a child hearing that. So right out of the gate, the first awareness I ever had of Pink Floyd existing was that it was this kind of dark, disturbing music.
But cartoony. It was like it had a cartoony element to it, so that's why I think it appealed to, sort of the preteen.
Yeah, and with our age, I think we were contemporaneously aware of The Wall as kids, right?
Yeah.
So that's maybe the first music I can really remember being new is in the late 70s, and the Wall is right in that zone for me.
It went from the only album that I could even bother listening to not even being able to tolerate it.
The whole pre-Dark Side history of Pink Floyd is, I think many people don't even know that it exists. The huge mainstream success they had and the constant presence on what is now classic rock radio, you would think that their career starts in like 1972 or something.
Just as Fleetwood Mac, you would think their career started in 1975.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of parallels between those two acts. I don't think I was even aware of Sid. I mean, like I was in that boat where I didn't really know of their early stuff at all until maybe I was in college or something. I didn't even really know that Syd Barrett existed. He was kind of forgotten, really, if you weren't like a real like rock fan or something,
Yeah.
Those songs don't live on the radio at all, any of the Sid stuff.
No, not at all. And the crazy thing about the whole Sid specter that looms over their career is that from the release of their first single until Sid was out of the band, we're talking 10 frenetic months. We're not even talking a year. And it also loomed over the rest of their career. Just these 10 months.
Yeah, right. So I guess let's go back to the beginning. We might as well go back to where the early genesis of Pink Floyd, starting with Sid and the four-piece pre-Gilmore.
Yeah, so the very first single that came out was Arnold Lane on the A side and Candy and a Currant Bun on the B side. Now I'm going to demarcate dates during this time to kind of guide us through because it's pretty intense, the roller coaster ride they go on. That was March 1967.
There's a real melodic through line to Sid's best stuff in this period, especially the singles, Arnold Lane and CM Lee Play singles, where it's all very melodically tied together with a very nice bow. It goes to interesting changes and melodies, and it's all like really pretty focused kind of songwriting.
Yeah, and the sort of not necessarily unfocused, but demented and deranged stuff is all very finely put together, so it's not unspooling into complete madness quite yet. Yeah,
and the scene they're coming from and the circumstances. I mean, it's 1967. They had kind of been around playing I think of them as their ballroom years. They would play these kind of happenings of shows. It's everyone's on drugs.
And that scene was called the Canterbury scene.
The Canterbury
Caravan,
scene, exactly.
You had Soft Machine.
Tomorrow kind of involved in that scene. So Floyd, though, was really the class of it because they had Sid's amazing songs. So you had not only as musicians, the other guys in Floyd are solid, not spectacular, really. I'd say David Gilmour, who joins the band later, is probably the most accomplished musician out of the rest of them.
Agreed, yeah.
But they're not really virtuoso musicians. They're all very creative.
Textural.
Yeah, exactly. So they had that kind of going for them, I think, early on. And then another weapon they had was Sid's also a very fine guitar player. His guitar excursions, the sort of raga stuff that he does. He's just, music just kind of pours out of him. He's just a very musical person. And, it's unquestionably his band and his vision.
And so See Emily Play, which is 3 months later, June 1967, that is, as far as I'm concerned, that's the apotheosis of playful, whimsical psych, tipping over into the demented brain damage that was going to overtake the songwriting.
Yeah, I mean that's just a jewel of a song.
It's perfect.
It's to me the pinnacle of psychedelic rock. Really was all made in the same building at the same time. They were there, Sgt. Pepper, and I think
it was Norman Smith. Right?
I think they cut CM Lee Play at Abbey Road. I know for sure Olive Piper was done there.
Olive Piper, yeah.
But they really nailed that, Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, British whimsical psychedelia. But again, CM Lee Play has that exquisite melody. The changes in the melody in that are surprising and very satisfying.
So then we have their debut record, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is just insanely good. I mean, this is, unquestionably Sid's record. He wrote every single song on the album except for one, which is easily the worst song on the record. That's Roger Waters' song.
Right.
That's Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk. But aside that, notwithstanding that clownish diversion, the rest of the album is ridiculously good.
Yeah, and they were in the fortunate position of they were kind of a low priority. They were on EMI, and they had a lot of notoriety from their live shows. And Piper is kind of a good example. They got some of the sort of ballroom psychedelia, longer form kind of songs.
Astronomy, Domine, and Interstellar Overdrive.
Right, so really showing off what they could do in that area, which and then also, but mixed in with Sid's little tight, concise little
They're so
pop
tight.
songs.
They're like, 2 to 3 minutes.
The word I keep going back to is focused, because of what happens later. That's the part that gets lost. Like, I think Sid still has the creativity. He still has the kernels of the ideas, but as his brain starts to fry, he starts losing the ability to focus them and finish them.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, I mean, but what I love about the album is that there is a foreshadowing. I mean, the end of Bike, it feels like he's predicting his own mental decline.
Yeah, it is very much like that. Piper was produced by Norman Smith and was recorded at Abbey Road simultaneously to when Pink Floyd was in Studio 1, I think, and the Beatles were definitely in Studio 2 there, doing Sgt. Pepper simultaneously. When Floyd started making Piper, the Beatles were finishing Sgt. Pepper, and by the time Floyd finished mixing the album, by the time it was complete, the Beatles had already moved on to making Magical Mystery Tour.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Wow. So this is all happening the same time in the same building, like literally down the hall. Norman Smith, who produced, was a Beatles engineer and had worked with them a lot, I guess, on days when Jeff, or maybe he was second engineer to Jeff Emmerich, but he was in the mix of the white lab coat guys at Abbey Road. And it sounds pretty radically different from the Beatles albums, which the Beatles albums really kind of preceding that, Rubber Soul, Revolver. I guess Revolver was the one immediately before it. Those are kind of very punchy, present, kind of in your face kind of albums. And the way that they're all recorded with close miking, Piper sounds kind of distant and celestial. It doesn't really have that sound at all. And I think that was a conscious decision on the part of the producers, even though they're using the same equipment that the Beatles are using. It doesn't really sound like those records. They really wanted to get that ballroom sound, I think.
And I think the main reason it's not known barely at all in America is not any kind of revisionism of history, but it's so British. It's in the same way that there's no way that the Kinks or the Village Green Preservation Society ever would have made a splash here.
There's also nothing, I mean, the two preceding singles are more singles, than anything that was on Piper. Piper was really, there's nothing really on you that screams out like this is going to be a radio single.
There is absolutely no question this is a 5-star record. It is a masterpiece from beginning to end. If you're not familiar with it, especially if you're a Pink Floyd fan and you're not familiar with this, you have to spend some time with this record.
Yeah, easy 5 stars on this one. I think it's not just in its own right. It's an exemplar of the style of psychedelia. It's a high watermark of a whole genre.
I'm a big psychedelia fan, so I'm kind of a sucker for the genre. But I would have to say this is one of my 50 favorite albums of all time. I have no idea about what number, but it's way up there.
Yeah, definite 5 stars on this one.
That is the summer of love for them, is basically, riding on, Piper being released, and Sid took a tremendous amount of acid from the recollections of everyone who was there at the time. It was basically a daily thing, and it was very unhealthy and not good. I mean, it wasn't. From what I've read, it sounds like it was a very harrowing experience, one that he just couldn't fight his way out of. And then when you kind of check back in on where he is musically, that is, it's August 1967, and Sid has written a song that Pink Floyd has recorded called Scream Thy Last Scream, and it's insane sounding. It almost sounds like metal.
It's unhinged.
And isn't that, I believe it's Nick Mason doing the vocal on that one. It wound up not being a released single. And then as they go into the fall of 1967, you have another unreleased single, this one called Vegetable Man, which is sort of a song-length attempt at complete and utter self-effacement. The obliteration of the self. I mean, he's looking at himself and he looks like an idiot to himself.
Yeah, neither of those are really kind of fun listens. They're definitely interesting to check out,
but crucial.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see where he's headed and to see the development. They don't really kind of like, again, like I was saying before, he's losing that ability to really tie it together and make it kind of work. It's more kind of stream of consciousness kind of thing.
I disagree with you. I think Scream Thy Last Scream is a very intense, powerful piece of songwriting. I never thought Vegetable Man was as good, but lyrically it's so striking that I almost see it as a diary entry more than a song.
Yeah.
But they're definitely, if you think Dark Side of the Moon is an adept document of the process of going mad, then you have not heard these two songs. And so moving along,
it's like actual going mad.
It's actual going mad. It's not as prettily packaged. So Vegetable Man was October 67. Then the next actual single that was released was the month following. In November, you have Apples and Oranges on the A side and Paint Box on the B side. And
I like that single.
It's a cool single. And it's also, during this particular trawl for Discograffiti, I found that it was telling that his attempt to be commercial, which it sounds like what this single is, it sounds like broken down, disassembled pieces of Beach Boys songs that were haphazardly thrown together, and yet it's still good. This is the last Barrett single.
Right. They were kind of in the position through all of Piper, really and even beyond Sid's departure, where it was the time in the music industry where the suits who were running things didn't really know what rock music and psychedelia was. They were just like, you kids just do whatever. We're not going to get involved too much. So they really had like no micromanaging. They were just kind of allowed to make whatever they wanted. And I think even Norman Smith had a pretty hands-off approach with them, just let them do their thing. And that's still kind of continuing through this single. Like, that's a pretty weird single. That's definitely not something you would think that's like, the suits are going to be super psyched about putting out, but they just don't know what they have. So they're like,
yeah, at that point,
they had a lot of freedom.
It was just like with films at that time. I think the suits were throwing their hands up and they said, I guess we don't know. We have no idea. So we'll let the lunatics run the asylum.
It was a brief window, a brief, glorious window.
Yeah.
There's a famous Frank Zappa quote about that. It's that brief period was really like kind of the glory days.
Yeah, unless you're listening to the Wild Man Fisher double album.
No, in Floyd's case, though, they really got an extended opportunity to find themselves, which I guess we'll talk about later.
Yeah, that's just right around the corner.
Yeah.
But that's another instance of the record company exactly thinking that, there's something to be tapped here, but we don't know what the hell's going on. So in between that window of, November 67 and the beginning of that next year, from all accounts, Sid was becoming a hell of a lot less reliable. He'd go perform on stage with, I believe, Mandrax, which was a popular pill at the time, and shampoo or something mixed in his hair. So while he played under the hot lights, it would melt down on his face. Apparently, Sid was doing this song around the time of the end of his tenure with the band called "Have You Got It Yet?" And the idea, and
it's kind of more of a concept than a song.
I like to think that they actually rehearsed this thing, and the idea was he'd always be a step ahead of them, always change the tempo and the chord sequence just when the band fell in step behind him, and that sort of pointed the way, I think, to these guys, just saying, we got to fucking chop the head off this giant.
I wonder how long they went with that before they said, fuck this. Stop trying to guess what he was going to do next.
Well, they certainly didn't go past early January 1968, which is...
so they're in making their second album, right? That's kind of where we're at right now.
Correct. But they're like in the midst of it. So in early January '68, for 8 days they were a 5-piece, and the idea initially was Sid was going to be their Brian Wilson, their brain damaged guy who just churns out the music from his living room.
The fifth piece being David Gilmour has now joined the party.
But what actually wound up happening was, famously, on January 26, 1968, all the guys were together. They were on their way to Sid's house, apparently, or maybe they hadn't even driven off to pick him up yet. And they just decided to not pick him up for a gig. And that was it. And then from then on, the beer-drinking architecture students were at the helm.
Right, and so they had done a little bit of recording with him. I want to say something like a quarter of Saucerful of Secrets has Sid on it. Is that about right? So it's Jug Band Blues, and then he plays on the title track. Right,
but before we go into Saucerful, what I'd love to do is follow the Sid trail until it ends, and then backtrack.
Okay,
so pretty soon after. Barrett was just unceremoniously, not even kicked out of the band, but just left out of the band.
They ghosted him.
So he came out with 2 bona fide solo records, The Madcap Laughs, which was produced by David Gilmour, and he apparently retrospectively feels terrible about the way he assembled it, because it underscored the breaking down of that focus that you were talking about before, Joe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Barrett is first, right?
Madcap Laughs is first.
Okay, so
that's my favorite of the two.
Yeah, Madcap Laughs seems to be the stronger of the two, where he has he still has really good kernels of things. There are 4 or 5 tunes on there in particular that have that are pretty cool. The Terrapin's really cool.
Terrapin's amazing.
No Good Trying, Dark Globe.
My favorite stuff is toward the end. All the stuff that David Gilmour feels terrible about. You can hear him rustling through pages and feel if it's in you. Late Night, especially the closing song. I mean, these are amazing songs, and if you spend enough time with them, like I did in 1991, you actually start to feel crazy, and it is not very healthy.
Yeah, there's a ragged quality to it that, depending on your temperament, can either be kind of endearing and fascinating or kind of off-putting. There's an air of unfinishedness about all of it. There's a kind of even the songs
more Madcap Laughs.
Yeah, the songs
different.
Yeah, the songs where there's a full band playing, you kind of get the idea they don't really know the song very well. There seems like some flubbed chord changes, and it's like, okay, that's as good as we're going to get it. Sort of. There's rough edges all around it for sure.
And again, entrenched in the Canterbury thing, so you have Soft Machine guys backing him up on Madcap Laughs. Then Barrett is not, I find, quite as consistent, but the highs are very high because you have Baby Lemonade.
Yeah, Gigolo Ant.
Right, Gigolo Ant. You have Dominoes is excellent. There's a lot of good stuff on that. Then there's sort of an odds and sods collection called Opal, the main strength of which is the title track, which is essential Sid. And that was basically it for Barrett. That after that he was in a band called Stars, and there's really, just shreds from them as far as what's available. I don't even think I've heard anything.
I've never heard any of that. And he started getting very private. Would rarely be seen in public. Got into painting and kind of stopped doing music. The Sid solo stuff kind of has a feeling of sadness that kind of hangs over it to me, because you can almost feel him like just almost being able to reach out and grab it, but can't quite. Like they fall kind of into the category of like interesting and fascinating albums more than truly great albums.
I disagree. To me, those are great.
They're a little bit like sad to me. They're a little bit
they're
like,
totally sad.
They're a little bit like I feel like it's sort of like I shouldn't be listening to them or something. You know?
That's why Gilmour felt so bad about producing it in that way. But one thing that Barrett said around that time, he did an interview, I think it was maybe 68, 69, and he said something to the effect of, I'm full of dust and guitars. Mm-hmm. I love that sentence.
Yeah.
And that's what it sounds like. It sounds like his brain is just in a permanent fog. But at the same time, that lack of focus that you were talking about, some of the tempo changes and chord changes on Madcap Laughs have a parallel universe logic that is beyond the understanding of a normal musician.
Right, that's true. I mean, he has, even on at the height of his powers, he was really like that as well, where he had a sense of like it isn't just his the psychedelic nature and his creativity, but as a composer, just his like the way he could make melodies twist around, like that element of it gets lost. That to me is like my favorite part of what he could do. And that has a kind of broken down where it's like just fragments of it on the later solo albums.
But then interestingly, to backtrack back to Saucer Full of Secrets, when you hear something like Jug Band Blues, and when you hear that fragmented mental state that was then, had the production muscle behind it.
That's the razor's edge. That's where he's right on, where it's still kind of all working.
Yeah.
And then that's the tipping point to me. Jug Band Blues is kind of the tipping point where after that it's a different kind of thing.
Right. It is the tipping point. That's the fulcrum right there. So Saucer Full of Secrets, to backtrack, came out in June 1968. Right at the outset of the record, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun is the only song with all 5 members on it. Saucer Full of Secrets is literally the opposite, songwriting-wise, of Piper. Piper was, Sid had every song but one, and on Saucer Full of Secrets, he only writes one song.
Yeah. And so this is where they get into they're starting to wander into the desert of figuring out what they are exactly. And it's a pretty interesting journey.
It's so fucking fascinating. Yeah. I mean, you and I were talking on the car ride over here just about how, a record company's unwillingness to squash a band if they have, what was clearly major trouble. I mean, you have a band that's most famous for the guy that's who's a true visionary, who's a true unique, like nobody else really, and even in his category. I mean, I try to think who's most similar to Syd Barrett. Maybe Kevin Ayers a little bit, like Arthur
not
Lee.
even Arthur Lee, but still not really. He's in such a unique category as a songwriter. That it's unfathomable to think that the guys backing him were going to make something, and then to turn into what it did is.
I mean, these guys would probably have been the first to admit that they were not visionaries. In fact, the management team behind Pink Floyd, when Sid was left out, they went with Sid.
Right.
Because Floyd was the losing bet.
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. So, to the extent that what they became famous for a lot of their career anyway, were these long, drawn-out pieces, the inception of that idea was they didn't have enough music for the record,
right.
And they needed something that would just be filler. So that was the title track of Saucer Full of Secrets. It's their first long-form piece, and it came out of writer's block, basically, or just lack of inspiration.
Mm-hmm. The song Saucerful, the longer form pieces on Saucerful of Secrets are not my favorites. Like compared to the ones on Piper, Set the Controls is kind of cool.
I love that. I love that song.
It's definitely like they're the ballroom style.
Totally. I can totally see that being.
It's cool. The ones that are really interesting to me, though, are the more kind of transitional songs. So there's a couple of Richard Wright songs where it sounds like he's kind of trying to do Sid and kind of does a pretty good job.
Pretty amazing. I love Remember a Day and Seesaw have always been my favorite tracks on that record because they're how you described Piper, that celestial, distant thing. It really is so fucking stonery.
Yeah.
It really just sweeps you right away.
Well, it seems like that was maybe one strategy they were going to pursue. Like, let's just keep doing these Sid-style songs. Richard Wright can kind of write ones that are kind of in the ballpark. Maybe this is one way we can move forward.
Yeah. Because still, Waters is not firing on all cylinders. You have Waters' first war-related song, Corporal Clegg, and it's just as shitty as all the rest of his war songs that would follow. But, it's a mixed bag. But overall, as a piece, it has a schism to it, almost like... it's a weird comparison, but the Beach Boys, Carl and the Passion's So Tough. It's
a couple different records in one record.
Yeah, and it's very fascinating. It always sounds good when it's on.
Yeah, the other track that I didn't really remember it, but it impressed me on this go through of listening to all the stuff is the Let There Be More Light, which is kind of like a proto Echoes, what they would later do. That one is a more successful to me long form piece, and that kind of hints that is kind of the direction they sort of did wind up going in. It was that tune.
This is for anyone who gives a fuck. This is Nick Mason's favorite Pink Floyd album, and he called it a crossfade instead of a cut. Which I found a pretty apt quote. So in the end, I would say Saucer Full of Secrets, it gets 5 stars.
I gave it a 4, but I think you could argue anywhere from 4 to 5. I dinged it a little bit because of a couple things that are fillerish to me, like the title track, and so a kind of a good chunk of it is a little bit fillery. But you can make a good argument that it's in the 4.5, 5 zone on just sheer listenability.
There's things I skip every time, still 5 stars.
Yeah, it's very good.
Okay, and then after Saucer Full of Secrets, the first thing they released was 6 months later. In December of 1968, you have a single. You have Point Me at the Sky on the A side and Careful with That Axe, Eugene on the B side. And then, in a cool little twist, the character of Eugene appears on the A side, and of course, that's who they're singing about on the flip. This is a great little song, again, stuck in that mid-period of, wandering around, bumping into walls, trying to find out who the hell they were.
Yeah, cool single. I think it shows the evolution of it. They're still kind of finding their way, and there's a lot of kind of stops and starts at this phase of their career where they're kind of doing projects that aren't really like an album per se. They're kind of these weird, like they do a bunch of soundtracks and
art installation, and then
like,
there's that
like weird double live / studio albums,
and then the Roger Waters collaboration with Ron Geeson.
Yeah,
the guy's name. The Body. It's called.
Yeah,
I think that's the only thing I haven't heard from the classic Floyd.
That's the same guy that did, well, we'll get to him later. I have a whole thing about Ron Geeson.
Oh, sweet. I don't have to take Ambien. So, during this time, I can't, this is endlessly fascinating to me because it's so very much the opposite these days. But from 1968 to 1971, they were allowed to stumble around and they had total freedom and liberty to find out who they were. And it's just so funny because it is so antithetical to what how things have turned out to be in the music industry. But the two bands I think of are Pink Floyd and Fleetwood Mac. And the Fleetwood Mac middle period is sonically very related to the Floyd middle period. It's like if you don't really know what kind of songs you want to write, then you really got to slather on the reverb and hope for some atmosphere to magically touch your tracks.
Yeah, and then they came out of it in completely opposite directions, and then both went on to being massively huge.
Right.
Fleetwood Mac with personnel changes, and Floyd just with basically constant evolution. They kind of took different paths to get there.
Right. So after that single at the end of 68, we entered 1969 with the soundtrack for the movie More.
And this one's kind of a lesser effort. And it is kind of, there's a bunch of stuff on it that kind of is what it sounds like, which is them just jamming in front of a screen with movie scenes that they're scoring.
Right, and that's literally what they were doing, is just jamming.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this stuff was actually first pass. This is the first album without Barrett. It's the first full album without him. And it's Barbet Schroeder's directorial debut. Have not seen the movie. Gilmour sings everything on the record, and his voice, his calming tones definitely characterize this time in the band's history. Yeah,
and this is another one where they're trying a lot of stuff here. There's some kind of hard rock moments on it. It's kind
Nile
of
song.
Yeah, it's known kind of mostly as like their folk rock album, and there is a lot of like acoustic stuff in that vein, which was a new sound for them, really. There's the Roger Waters thing, Cymbeline. That's kind of a highlight.
Green is the color I love.
Yeah, and then there some of the more atmospheric things. Like there's the one song, Cirrus Minor. It's kind of like it's not really a super essential track, but it's kind of primordial Floyd, atmospheric, eerie. There's like birds chirping on it.
This is, I love More. It's a very inconsequential piece of work.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'd have to say I'd give it a solid 3.5 stars.
That's what I gave it. I gave it 3.5 as well.
It's just one long piece of tangential drift.
Yeah, and you can edit it into a little, 5 or 6 song playlist. That's pretty nice. And there's the quality to all this early Floyd stuff that is, a lot of their stuff has been just, you've been bombarded with it on classic rock radio, pretty much from everything Dark Side on. Mm-hmm. It's like you've heard those songs as many times as you've heard like Taking Care of Business or something. And I think that takes a lot of the shine off some of those songs. No, it's nobody's fault. It's just sheer repetition of it, but these early Floyd records all the way up, I think even through metal, you haven't been assaulted with them, over the airwaves for decades, and so they sound fresh and kind of like Magical Mystery Tour. That's right. The era of the bit. You never hear the Magical Mystery Tour songs on the radio. Yeah, so these still kind of have they're kind of more personal to me in a way. Like I could put them on for enjoyment in a way that I'm probably not going to put on Shine On You Crazy Diamond to listen to for fun, because I don't really need to, because I've heard it a billion times. Yeah, exactly. This stuff always sounds good when it's on. So after More, we have Umaguma. The band do not like this record. Also, for whatever it's worth, it's the last album to feature the band on the cover. It is a double album. One of them is live. One of them is studio/solo, kind of like how Emerson, Lake and Palmer divided all their shit up for that pile of trash album Works. Volume 1. Exactly, and Volume 2. But the idea of naming something Volume 1 when you make it is just very special kind of arrogance. And I love the idea of, even though World War I was called the Great War, I like to think that some asshole was like, nah, this is World War I. This is fun. But Umaguma is... I've always loved Umaguma. I have a weak spot for that record because it really is a total experiment, and it's a big experiment, and they totally fail. I mean, they don't. It's, even though it's not a great record, there's nothing like it, kind of thing. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. I especially am privy to the Roger Waters stuff. Grantchester Meadows is amazing. Several species of furry animals gathered together and grooving with a pick. It's a great noise collage. Some of the other solo stuff, not as great, but not disastrous either. What do you think? This one I don't like as much. I do like the live disc. I'm not usually a fan of live albums. The live stuff's good. But this one, it captures them kind of at the last... and the tail end of the ballroom kind of thing. It's a good recording, and they play pretty inspired, and I was surprised to enjoy it as much as I did listening to it for the purposes of this. So I like the live side. The studio side, I mostly don't really like. I mean, I do like Grantchester Meadows, But that really seems like a 7-minute song that should be a 3-minute song.
Not to me. I love how meandering it is.
It just like repeats itself.
I know, but it's so meandering. That whole phase of the band is so meandering.
I just feel like it's like they needed to fill more time on it, so they're just like,
it's funny.
I'll just repeat it.
I was just thinking I could have heard like a 15-minute version. Right. Seriously, I think that was part of a piece they were doing at the time. That was supposed to be a full day,
right? And
that was the daybreak section of it.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice piece. That's probably the highlight for me on the studio side. The Gilmour stuff is okay. The Richard Wright thing I don't like at all. Sisyphus, the appropriately titled Sisyphus, because it's like rolling a giant boulder up a hill and then having it crash down on you.
I know it's not good music, but to be honest with you, my judgment is clouded during this period of the band's history because I have a weak spot for basically everything they did.
Yeah, if you're the kind of person who likes to hear the evolution of it, this is obviously a key piece in it. They're still definitely building the building blocks. The concept of it, I think, didn't really play to what their strengths were, though, because there were 4 pieces on the studio album where they're each leading their own thing. And they work better, I think, when they work together.
Well, the funny part of it is they went to Waters and... I don't know if it was, at least one of the guys went to Waters and said, can you please write some words? And he was like, go fuck yourself. It's your side.
Right. So they're the ultimate kind of, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts sort of band to begin with. So I feel like when they're all collaborating, this is them working, it's the weakest way for them to work, for them to each be the leader. They're kind of by nature all sort of supporting pieces, really.
Agreed, but I give it 4 stars anyway.
I gave this 3, mostly for the live side.
Bro, I get it. So next up, we enter the 1970s with a soundtrack for Michelangelo Antonioni's Zabriskie Point, an admittedly totally shitty movie. Extremely poorly made from a director who's known for making very well-made movies. But it wasn't just the Floyd. It was the Dead were involved. Kaleidoscope, who are an amazing band. The American one. There's 2 Kaleidoscopes from that time. Zabriskie Point, for me, mainly underscores folk paths not taken. You have a few... songs on that piece, Country Song, Crumbling Land in particular, and Rain in the Country. They all betray a Crosby, Stills and Nash influence. And then Come In Number 1, Your Time Is Up is a re-recording of Careful With That Axe, Eugene. And we're just, in similarly atmospheric territory, and the stuff just sounds really good.
Yeah, and they're kind of getting the sort of chill vibes going that they would kind of more be known for later. It's a little bit like in the folk rock thing the way Moore is, but I think they're just kind of getting a little better at what they're doing. Everything kind of has a real kind of chill pocket, and it feels very relaxed, and they feel kind of comfortable and the Zabriskie Point stuff. So I guess this stuff wasn't really released until many years later on the box set, right?
Right. So
it's kind of widely bootlegged.
Right. So there's all kinds of bonus tracks on that and things like that. But this is not a major piece of work for them. I wouldn't even call it their best soundtrack work, but I would give it 3 stars.
Yeah, I think that I had that jotted down the same as 3. Worth checking out, worth seeking out. There's a good version of it. There's a fellow that runs a blog called Albums That Never Were, which kind of is just what it sounds like. He kind of makes these kind of meticulously compiled and mastered versions of albums that were never really released. And that's probably the definitive version. If you want to hear this, I would go check that out. He's always updating it and improving. It's
so goddamn good. This guy, I check it every day, honestly, because I just love what he does.
He doesn't post that often, but this one's one of the better ones I feel like I've gotten on that site. It feels like a real record.
And then moving on to Adam Heartmother, which is the second and final album of 1970. Adam Heartmother is an interesting hybrid. The album's concept is similar to Umaguma in that it features the full band in the first half with a thick blanket of symphonic sodomy, just straddling the entire goddamn thing and overtaking it, and then focuses on individual members in the second half. Side 1 is a piece of shit, and side 2 is a masterpiece. That's just what you have to accept about Adam Hartmother.
Yeah, well, our friend Ron Geeson is back here, so I'll read you the notes. Contemporary. So the side 1 is a big long prog kind of epic, and the problems with it are manifold. Lots of problems with it.
It's so fucking doesn't work.
Yeah, it's very ponderously written in the first place, and then on top of it, there's all this orchestration, and it was done by this guy Ron Geeson. I don't know much about his other work, but the orchestration on this just sucks. It's like very vanilla. It's scored for some very odd, it's like 10 brass and no strings. So it's all this kind of bombastic sort of brass kind of sound. And there's no like interesting harmony in it. There's no
melody,
counterpoint.
Nothing. There's nothing. It's just like a blank slate. My
notes just say this title track is terrible. The orchestration is shitty. This composition is boring as fuck. This cat Ron Geeson, he sucks. I don't know about his other work, but this definitely sucks. This is making me mad how bad it is.
Well, here's the endlessly
notes.
Annoying thing to me about Adam Hartmother, because I have a long relationship with this record. I love every song on the second side.
Yes,
so
side
much
2 is really great.
That I keep thinking that I missed something on the first side. So the amount of goddamn time I've wasted going back and reassessing Adam Hartmother, it's not worthy of it.
Yeah.
First of all, you have If by Roger Waters, which is, a solid song. Mm-hmm. Summer 68 is amazing.
That's great.
By Rick
That's a great jam. If really almost an unknown buried treasure of their catalog. People don't really know that song.
And then my favorite song on the record is Fat Old Son.
Yeah, that's great too.
Gilmore. I mean, talk about atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
He loves that song. That's just an amazing little tune. And then Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast is a cool little piece. I've always loved that.
Yeah, Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast is like a sound collage that sounds like it's made out of a few different pieces that they stitched together and then some interstitial sounds. But
it's like if Nick Mason did something good for Umaguma.
But there's something very welcoming about Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. There's something very friendly about it. It's not like a dark kind of psychedelia. There's a warmth to it somehow.
And isn't it amazing how you go from the title track, which is so thick,
right,
with everything, to this pared down
minimalist kind of piece,
field recording of a guy cooking bacon and eggs.
Yeah, that is somehow so much more inviting.
Yeah. So basically, Ron Geeson sets the table for the rest of the band.
I don't know if it's really his fault, because he came at the end after they had tracked that piece. There's also some sort of technical issue with the recording of the title track of Adam Hartmother, where they were not able to, it's because of the format they were recording, and they were not able to make edits. So they had to get the whole 20-minute thing in one take. So,
that's barbaric. It really is. That record, even with the first side being a complete waste of time, so you only have one side left, I give it 4 stars.
I gave it 3.5. I averaged it between 5 and 1 or whatever. I guess that would be 3. So I gave it a little bit of a bonus. I gave it 3.5.
I mean, I can't not like the record. Yeah. Those songs on side 2 are amazing.
Trust us on this one. Skip side 1 and check out side 2. It really is up. It's
some of their best work.
It's some of their best work, and it'll be all unfamiliar to you because they're songs that hardly anybody knows at all.
And then, truly, Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, if you look at the history of Pink Floyd, is the sayonara to the beginning phase of the band. It's an experimental piece. They would never plumb those same waters again, ever.
And that concludes part 1 of the Pink Floyd episode. Quite a journey so far, but there's still a lot more to go. Be sure to come back next time for part 2 of the Pink Floyd saga, their ascent into otherworldly fame. And also coming up, we have, besides Floyd Part 2, we have Badfinger, Cocteau Twins, Beck, Sly and the Family Stone, Van Halen, Betty Davis, the Bee Gees, and tons more, including very special episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and please subscribe to us on the podcast platform of your choice. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we can't wait to see you next week for Pink Floyd Part 2, 1970 to 2014.